Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of CloudBites Conversations, where I have someone here who the person joining me today is someone I worked out earlier on. I have known for 15 years, was one of the people that I would say is probably most instrumental in both my career in Salesforce, but probably a lot of careers in Salesforce. He's a very humble person and won't. I'm getting all this stuff out of the way now before he could interject and say, stop me. But this person's probably had almost, I'd say, the biggest impact from a community member on the Salesforce ecosystem out there. So the person I have here today joining us is Andy Fawcett, the one, the only Andy in the cloud. Welcome to the podcast, Andy.
Thank you, Paul. And yes, you didn't tell me you were going to say that, so I'm blushing. But thank you so much for the kind words, and I'm super pleased to be here chatting with you today. So looking forward to it. Thanks.
No, it's fantastic to have you here because I have alluded to this on a few of the episodes before, but my first job in the ecosystem 15 years ago, I did have to check how many years ago it was before this call, was at FinancialForce. I, in fact, enjoy telling people that I was technically FinancialForce's first employee because everyone else was coded to go before me. Do you remember you had to delay my contract because of the letterhead change?
Wow, coded to go. Yeah, I remember that.
So we've known each other a long time, and most people are going to have heard of you because you are a living legend in the ecosystem. But for the two people who might be listening who haven't heard of you, give us a little bit of background about who you are and how you got started in the Salesforce space, and really kind of a whistle-stop tour of the many roles you've had. Because whilst your background is super interesting, there's loads of cool stuff you've done here that I want to speak about today, more than just here's my 4 jobs.
Yeah. Wow. Where does it start? Well, I guess, it started for me on premise, and like many people of sort of my era, building financial apps, hence FinancialForce. And I worked for a company called Coda, and I cut my teeth on COBOL. I'm already dating myself now. But back then we were building apps for accountants. The slogan was accountants designed the apps and they built the apps. Well, largely developers built the apps. So Coda built that on multiple platforms on premise, and IBM AS400 iSeries was one of them. So I was working on that. And as things moved into the cloud, we gradually moved onto the client desktops. I used Visual Basic to build a new interface over the green screen interface that was then available. And eventually we took that application, that accounting application, into the cloud. And Jeremy Roach was the CEO at the time of that business and came to me and said, Andy, look, you've been doing some good things building infrastructure and frameworks for our on-premise apps, because at that point we're building on Windows and Linux and running a Java-based application as well. And I was loving that because it's a lot of internal infrastructure and frameworks and platforms, as you'll probably hear as a theme. I love doing things like that because it helps enable others and myself to do more. And he said to me, look, this platform, Salesforce, it's launching this new thing called Visualforce and Apex, and I think we'll be able to build more complex things on it. And their CEO thinks it's a good idea, so let's go and try it. But you won't be building all the nitty-gritty. You'll have to sort of level up. And it was a pretty easy sell. Jeremy's a pretty good salesman, turns out. And the rest is history, in that the Salesforce platform really got under my skin as a way to achieve more and reach your goals. And it doesn't always have to be about coding. And that's when I first started to fall in love with Clicks Not Code. But I never left the coding side of it, because with every abstraction, there's always some limitations. And I think the beauty of what we do, not just with Salesforce, but every day now we see new frameworks and tools such as AI, is finding the right balance of those tools to get the job done. And I always loved Salesforce for that. So I found myself building the world's first accounting application with you, Paul, on the Salesforce platform. And, there was a lot of concern back then about the data and things like that, but we pushed on. It's like, oh, can't have my accounting data in the cloud. Is it secure? Well, again, it turns out that it's pretty hard to create secure data scenarios in the cloud, and it better partner with somebody that focuses on that more than we might do. So we pushed on, and obviously that business continues to thrive. But it led me into the ecosystem, and I found a lot of warmth and friendliness in there. And I think everyone largely is an introvert that's in technology, and I'm definitely one of those. And but I find it so much more at ease within the Salesforce community because it's so diverse. There's so many lovely people there. That still tap me on the shoulder now and say hi, Andy. And I've been in Salesforce in that bubble for a long time now, but it's just great. It's a wonderful ecosystem, and it led me to get more engaged in the Salesforce conferences, write books, and just really share my love for what it is. And that's how I got into the Salesforce business, really moving from engineering to product management. And that taught me to focus more on the why than the what. And that was a good lesson. I think everybody, whether you go into product management or not, needs to really understand the why before you do anything. I mean, there's room for experimentation, and I think you want us to talk a little bit more about some of the community projects. I'll talk a bit more about experimentation in that juncture, but I really learned a lot about the why there, and I find myself now, of course, in a marketing role as VP Developer Relations at Heroku at Salesforce, and in some respects coming a little bit full circle. But yeah, that's kind of how things worked for me, and I'm super proud to have those opportunities and work with the people I have throughout the years, because it really helps you understand what it takes to get things done in this world and stay atop of things, really.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that there's so there's two things you kind of mentioned there. One of them being the ease of using Salesforce, and I think so after we had our first interview, because I think and so apologies to everyone else that I'm using references for mine and Andy's interviews, because this is just me remembering things. But so Andy, I actually applied for a .NET role. I think it was listed because there weren't any Salesforce developers in the world at the time.
Right.
It was fairly new. And I remember after the first interview, kind of coming out of that, and I think it was yourself I was chatting with on the way out, and sort of the normal kind of like, well, we'll be in touch, thanks for coming, sort of things. And where I was very much looking to stay in the .NET space, I was a bit like, okay, fair enough, like we'll see. And you just said like, look, go here, and like I think I remember you like writing it down on a bit of paper for me. Go there, get yourself an org, and just have a quick play with it. And I remember that being the light bulb moment for me when I kind of sat down that weekend and was just having a look at it and being like, oh, I don't have to write authentication. Oh, I don't have to write database migration scripts. Oh, it's given me a UI. And like those myriad of things that, after however many years, 15 odd years, you kind of just take for granted and forget about. I think it's important to remember how easy Salesforce makes so many things. I was in a LinkedIn conversation with someone the other day and they were talking about more modern platforms and calling Salesforce legacy. And I was like, they're like, well, would you recommend it? So I was like, well, yeah, I do. Because, it's got a single database that does sales and service. They're like, oh, yes, well, we all say data's connected, but how long does that take? I was like, no, it's there out of the box.
It really is, yeah.
Like, people might not like using Salesforce because the implementation's bad, or, there's a myriad of reasons people might like not using certain things, but the core underlying infrastructure and technology is really robust still. And even if you want to use Airtable or anything else, it's still surprisingly competitive and works well against them. And I think I still can't think how people don't get that still. You know what I mean? Or also like how it still shocks me occasionally that I'm still so surprised by how easy it is to do. I'll go away and do some work in like a Node.js app or something else, and after the third database migration script, I'm just like ripping my hair out, wanting to cry.
Yeah, I think it's about just looking at what you want to achieve and the tools that you need to achieve that as quickly as possible, but safely as possible, and beyond just getting to the point of your first release. It's how does it continue to manage iterations on what you've built, those upgrades, and managing that, and deployment and distribution, discoverability, and the platform as a whole provides all the whole gamut of that, from all the way from the beginning of the idea all the way to maintaining it out in the marketplace. If you look at App Exchange, and it turns out as I got more into Heroku over the years, while it lets you get lower level into the programming languages and the diversity of the languages available, it's very much a managed service as well. There's nowhere where I need to manage patching my servers and managing the latest build frameworks and things like that. I'm just doing git push Heroku main, and very similar to SF deploy, and it's figuring it out and hosting it and running it. And we're at a juncture now, which we'll talk about a bit later, where we can blend the beauty of the power of using all those languages and performance that gains with the same experience that you have within Salesforce as well. So, I think I wasn't around during the acquisition, but it's definitely got a lot of similar DNA traits, like making the hard stuff simple, as you say. And it is strange to think that anybody wants to launch an app and do all the hard things before they do the thing that matters the most, which is creating a differentiated app in the market. And if I had a great idea right now, I would definitely use Salesforce and Heroku to be able to create that idea and get it to market, because I don't want to be mired in those technicalities, or really call myself a security expert, frankly.
Oh yeah, I have no, like, I was helping a customer implement one of the headless identity flows the other day, and it's working and it's fine, isn't it? But there was just part of me was like, I am so glad that I never have to think about, the Salesforce has abstracted all of the. I mean, I'm still doing a bunch of OAuth dancing, which is fine,
right?
But the idea of being like, having to set any of this up yourself, no, or relying upon a third party kind of MIT open source plugin that you're just hoping that some poor person in the middle of Iowa probably maintains and doesn't let drop down. It's lots of stuff on that. So after one of the things that you are well known for outside of outside of kind of your roles, because obviously you're VP at product management at Salesforce for kind of the platform side of things, and obviously CTO at FinancialForce in your current role, is a lot of the community stuff and your involvement in the community. So there's a couple of big things you've worked on here. So there's and let's talk about them, because the one I really want to talk about, because Andy and I have known each other a long time, and Andy knows that I have strong feelings about unit of work and FFlib and things like this in different areas, because there's always healthy conversation, I think, around these different things on there. But let's talk about things like DLRS and the deployments all first, and kind of and just your views on community stuff and adding those things into the community to open them up.
Yeah, I think this is kind of where some of these things, particularly DLRS, came about because of my sort of inherent DNA to want to simplify things. And DLRS, I think, was 2013, something like that. And I was just getting, as you said earlier, excited about how easy it is to point and click with things in Salesforce and how powerful that was. And I happened to notice there's no roll-ups on master detail records. And then somehow I stumbled across an Apex library that does that, but it did it only with code.
Yeah.
And DLRS was born, and I didn't really know how popular that was actually going to be. I thought maybe a few people would use it, and Salesforce might eventually implement that feature. But it was really an experiment, and it turned out to be probably the most successful open source thing I've done, and I'm very, very, very grateful for the Salesforce open source team that's managing it now. Big shout out to them to moving it forward. It's now thriving with certainly more than one person working on it, which is great. And it was just more born out of I feels like a good idea. Now, normally good convention tells us think about the why before the what when you're investing your time, and then you've got good grounding. But sometimes, if you do have a good sense, a gut feel, put some time into it, get it out there in a small way and see what, the litmus test is, response to it. And, while I was working on DLRS, it was an amazing time. There was a lot of great support and people coming and going, supporting it in the in the Trailblazer group. Some great people answering questions when I wasn't able to. So yeah, that was kind of an interesting one, born out of a bit of an itch and a feeling. The FF Lib stuff is another great story. You know, big shout out to the team there that's managing that now, because Stephen and I met with them and said, look, it's best to move that into the open source community. I think that's also got Apex mocks in it as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, some fantastic things that have continued to move on, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm actually working on deployment tool again right now. It's actually quite old because it's that's also around that time frame, and it's using an old version of the API that's now getting cut off. So I figured I better update it. And sure enough, while it runs forever on Heroku, things do. They just, like on Salesforce, they just run until they don't, and largely it would have stopped because of this API problem. I'm updating it to latest Spring Boot and leveraging a lot of new muscles that I'm growing back now in development side of sort of Java and whatnot. So deployment tool is due for a new release. I'll probably give it a facelift as well and blog about it in the upcoming weeks. And then the other one you didn't call out was the metadata API wrapper. That one's
Well, this is the problem when you've done so much, Andy. It's very hard to kind of keep a big old list of them. You think?
But that one's an interesting one because that dates back to pre-cloud Salesforce days. I was a big XML junkie, and I loved being able to express and manage XML in code, but realized that it was a pain to have to do that like element by element, much as it is with JSON. And WSDL was the language equivalent of Open API schema back then. And I started doing a lot of presentations around that. And metadata API, Apex Wrapper came about. And I was also greatly privileged to work with Andrew Smith, the PM for Apex at the time, who created the Apex metadata API, the native one. Yeah, I'm really pleased to see that being adopted. I do feel like there's still an itch there to provide some dynamic way to update that wrapper. It's largely manual right now, but still a lot of folks use it as is. Older versions of it still work depending on what you need out of the metadata API. But that was kind of just, I call that driven by my lazy developer DNA element. And what I mean by that, and most people smile, some people scowl when I say that. I saw you smile. Mainly because I've probably told you about it before, but it doesn't mean I'm fundamentally lazy. It means that I don't like doing repeated things. I like to solve known problems and get more focused on the problem domain that I'm really delivering on. So, you know, that DNA really forced me to create a lot of libraries and tools that we're talking about today. So, yeah, and that's kind of where some of those tools and motivations came from.
So there's that famous Bill Gates. I'm going to misquote it now, but I'm sure it's something like 5 minutes. I'm sure it's in one of his books where he says, "I want lazy people." No, don't get, and like it's again, it's not that thing that it's meant like he wants people that are not going to do the work. He wants people that will find do the work once and then never have to do it again. I know exactly what you mean by that because my first proper programming job before university was at the Daily Telegraph. I worked on their contact center, and the reason I got the role there was because I went for work experience, which in the UK is a week out that every student gets at 16, 17, where they go and look at what it's going to be like for a job in reality. And normally, depending on where you go, depends on whether you're making the tea, doing data entry, whatever it might be. But at my one, they gave me 10,000 rows of data and said, can you put this in? And thought, well, that will shut him up for the week. And an hour later, I was like, there you go, that's done. And they're like, how have you done? Like, you can't. And obviously, all I'd done was been like, wrote a little script and imported it and mapped it, and the job was good. Boom. So yeah, I completely get that, and I think it's a very important. I think it's a very important thing to think about: is what can you do? What can you do once and do well that you don't have to do many, many times?
Yeah, no, absolutely. My dad was on my shoulder right now as well. I suppose he is my late father. He would remind of the story. He came in to my room when I was working on my computer, And he said, "You should be doing your homework, not playing games." And I turned the screen around and said, "No, I am. I'm writing Pythagoras theorem program in BBC Basic, so I could answer my maths question homework." And he always, I don't think I could let this moment by in homage to his always telling that story. Look at me now. I'm embarrassing myself telling that story, but I still have that BBC Basic program. Maybe I'll share it.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's a good one. I think, I was chatting to a chap called Ross Layton, who runs Both at 12 yesterday, who another ISV partner who do the MailChimp integration, Eventbrite integration. And we were talking about our first computers and things like that. And we were both saying that we had the same experience. It sounds like you had a similar one where my parents, when they got my first proper Windows PC, I remember my dad in later years telling me like he struggled to pay it off because he was just like, he said it was just ridiculously expensive at the time and all of this stuff. And I was like, oh, well, I didn't know that. And he was like, yeah, he said, but you seem to have done all right out of having it and basically spending all of my life on it, trying to program the lapse on it, breaking it, going, oh, I've broken it, and then fixing it again, all of these things. But and he said he had the same. So it sounds like, similar sort of vein as yourself that,
Yeah, it can be very influential. The UK started that computer literacy program around the BBC Micro started, and many people cite that, rightly so, as being the incubus. And I think, you make, for parents, it's important time putting these sort of tools in their hands of children and see where it goes. And the slight other part to that story I just told was that my dad actually argued intensely with my mum about which computer to buy. It was either a Spectrum or an Acorn, and my dad knew the Acorn was educational. And I'm not saying the Spectrum's any better than an Acorn for anybody listening, by the way, but it was more synonymous with games, you see. So, but anyway, the things that seed our futures are important.
Yeah, it's very funny, isn't it? That just a simple decision like that can just have a massive ballooning impact. So, DLRS, I want to also thank you on DLRS for giving me my favorite interview question. So, whenever I'm interviewing, and this is interviewing for senior developers, senior consultants, or architects, someone who's been around Salesforce for a few years. I always ask them, because one of the questions I normally ask is kind of, what would you change if you could change tomorrow about Salesforce? And the number of times that you get like roll up summaries on lookup is phenomenal. But my question to them always is that if when you were VP of when you're in charge of the platform, Andy, you had the power, if you wished to go and just do that. You could have sat there and said, we're going to have a team that goes away for this next 6 months and do that. But my question always is to them is that, what is the reason that Salesforce don't allow you to have a lookup? And I just said, imagine that the UI could have the option, because I've had people just say, well, because there's no button for it. I'm like, no. And I was like, what's the technical reason that they don't allow for a roll-up summary on a lookup field? And it's such a good question, I find, because the number of people that haven't understood the fundamental difference between a lookup and a master detail is staggering.
Yeah.
So so it's my favorite interview question. I thank you wholeheartedly for allowing me to use that one to weed people out.
Ultimately, the DLRS is great power, great responsibility. Epitomized, really, because you can create some performance challenges with it when you tell it to do what it does, even though you're using clicks. And that's largely one of the reasons. By the way, it's interesting that the perception is that because I was VP product management in platform, I ran the platform. Oh, wonderful, but wasn't the case. But many people did come and go. Many, 4 or 5 people at a time throughout my sort of 8-9 years to talk about, tell us more about DLRS. Let's see if we can implement it in the core platform. So there was desire, and there, presumably still is, but for one reason or another, it just hasn't happened yet. But DLRS has been noticed within Salesforce, and it's something that there's an awareness of that. It's popular, but there's a lot of ways in which you can do things with data now with Salesforce, as
Yeah.
everybody, as your listeners know. So I don't know whether that gap will get plugged, but there's a great community around DLRS to make sure it's used sort of responsibly. And I know there's some more tooling going on around it to allow you to look at what's configured and manage that properly. Because great power, great responsibility, and all.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think one of the things that when I was running a consultancy, I'd always encourage my team to be doing if they were looking at using DLRS or something, was just make sure that people understood. I'm going to use the term that you're breaking the sharing model. You're not always breaking the sharing model because obviously, I mean, not everyone's always got it implemented that they are
Mhm.
very different sharing models and things like that. But it's surprising the number of people that didn't understand the fact that there is that sharing model in there that you could, if you can't see the child records in the lookup because they've got a different sharing
Mhm.
model, what happens? So yeah, it is as you
Yeah, I
say,
mean that there is actually, it turns out there is a flag to control that, but I believe it defaults to system. It's the most natural
yeah,
thing people want, but you can change it to user mode, and it only rolls at what your users got. But largely, that's doesn't make a lot of sense unless the field applies to those sets of users. So it defaults that
exactly.
way. But
Yeah, no, it's.
yeah,
I think and don't get me wrong, is well aware there's all these nice settings that can do it, but it is just that fundamental thing that
yeah,
I always find an interesting conversation with people to say like, have they understood the difference properly between one and the other? So
yeah,
yeah, because it is. Well, I think that's where you get the more elegant solutions is when people are like, oh, okay, I understand this now. And there's also a myriad of options where you're trying to do anything using a standard object and you just master details won't work for you anyway. So that's all these sorts of problems. So so FFlib and the Apex Enterprise pattern. So
yes.
you have obviously got a book out which has been out for a number of years now, which is it because the name's changed a couple of times, hasn't it? Is it Salesforce Enterprise Patterns
It's
now, or
Salesforce platform enterprise patterns now, but yes, the name's tried
I'm
to track each iteration. It's the fourth version. Tries
yes,
to track what the latest branding is, but good 3 chapters of what are now I think 12 or 13 cover the library
yeah,
FFlib in that book. But I mean that library came about working with Stephen Wilcock internally in Salesforce, in FinancialForce rather. You were part of that era as well, I believe.
mhm,
And then just coming to a point where it'd be good to share that. And that was also around 2013, I think. So we started to refine it. And of course, good, massive credit to Martin Fowler, of course,
yes,
because whether it's this platform or any other, we've seen you can see evidence of these patterns everywhere. And
yeah,
even the latest Heroku App Link SDK, which we'll talk a bit later about, has a unit of work pattern around the Composite API from Salesforce because it's just a lot easier pattern to work with. So credit to his pioneering visionary around those patterns, and FinancialForce, Stephen and yourself and others that helped us get those into open source, and the team that's now maintaining them. Huge credit to them as well.
So because the interesting thing with FFlib and those patterns is, um, and I will be very very open here. I have a love hate relationship with them. John
Like the
Daniel,
Marmite situation.
yeah, and no, it's so John Daniel, who is one of the maintainers now, I think,
Yep.
or heavily involved in it. So John and I worked together at Mavens, and the one of the very first things he kind of when we were sat down next to each other, one of the first things he said to me was about like, "Oh, you used to work with Andy," and I was like, "Oh yeah," and he said like, "So you must be a huge fan of all of the FF lib patterns and use it everywhere," and I was like, "Hmm," and it's so to kind of I think that the beauty and the beauty and the downside of the patterns is that they are enterprise patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is when we were, and this is what I kind of tell people when we talk about it, is that anyone who's ever seen the back of Financial Force's code or Satinia's code base as it now is, it is, I mean, now it definitely is a big ERP. But even when we were working on it way back when 15 years ago, and I hope to God there's none of my code still in there, It was
I'm
a
sure there is.
yes. Is that probably something doing something terrible with custom settings? Remember when we broke custom settings
I
and we
do,
had
yeah.
yeah. What was the guy's name who called us?
I don't
Oh,
know.
yeah. Anyway, but yeah, the but the kind of thing is that for that large scale, very complex, very structured enterprise level application, I think it makes sense. What was interesting was when I switched to do consulting with smaller organizations, and I was like, this doesn't
Footprint.
make sense to put in here because if I add this in, I'm going to have 99% of the code be FF lib or whatever we were
That's
calling
right,
it back
yeah.
then.
The
And then
footprint
I'm
just,
going to have my tiny trigger here that's doing,
yeah.
and then there's all these wonderful scales of grey in between as to where you need things. And I think that one of the real interesting things about those patterns, and I don't know if you've seen sort of like Pablo Gonzalez has a new book coming out about clean Apex code, and I'm on the foreword of that, and I read it and reviewed it beforehand. It's a great book, but he talks about patterns in there, and obviously Dan Appleman in his book talks about patterns. And
Mhm.
I think that one of the really interesting things that's out there now in the ecosystem is that there isn't just one pattern library and one
Mm.
pattern point of view, because Salesforce is used so broadly now that there is everyone from these, you
Yeah.
know, three people. I've had, I think the smallest company I've worked with was a 2-person startup who still had Enterprise Edition somehow, all the way through to I did a rollout for 120 countries once for some big pharmaceutical company. And those are two different ends of the scale. And you know what? The pharmaceutical company definitely needed patterns and libraries and standards
Mm.
and things. And the 2-person organization were not going to pay me to sit there and go, well, actually, we need to make sure we've got this implemented. And so I think so. Where I'm trying to get at on this is over the years you've been working with it and used it, though. Obviously, you've worked primarily in, I think, product development instances. Have you noticed that there's been an evolution of the patterns as the platform has changed and as the functionality available on it has changed?
Yes, I mean firstly, like, let me just loop back to sort of your observation about the size, the size of an
Yeah,
organization for the fit for the patterns. One of the most screenshotted slides, I think, when I was back presenting it, and I could probably dig it out and you can share it for your listeners later.
yeah, it'd be
Is
great.
there's a people say to me, when should I use it and not? And I had this, like, I can't remember whether it was a pyramid diagram or something, but it actually, I think it was a table, and it said if you've got this amount of code, this amount of developers and features,
Yeah,
what should you use? And I think like the first row for sure said don't use it, and the
yeah,
second one was you might want it, but all of them said think about separation of concerns. If you
mm,
do nothing else, at least have the light concept of here's my business logic service, here's where my database logic goes. Even if you don't use fflib or whatever library,
mm,
please, for heaven's sake, think about where that code resides. And I think you're right, because it can be quite intimidating. It's quite a big library. It was designed to be quite light initially, but it's grown in complexity, and it has tracked platform features such as the obviously the user mode
mm,
capability in Sockle and in platform in general, and that's actually worked very well for the selector pattern to adopt that, and the Chris Peterson's query factory that he added has allowed us to adopt that, and other features that allow you to break down the domain model has been added as well. I know the latest version of my book expanded on that as best it could with, I forget the acronyms we came up with, but there was 2 modes of using the domain model. One was where you put all your business logic in one domain class, but
yeah,
then over time folks have realized that you want to break out some objects have so much domain logic, you want to
yeah,
segregate them out into separate classes. So there's a model where you can do that, and even do that with different triggers. I forget now the detail of that, but there has been evolution in how you can adopt it with platform features, and those platform features have been adopted as well, and also just structure your code. As you know, because the original emphasis was about one trigger, one domain class, but
mhm,
this latterly you'll see this flexibility in it as to how you can come into an existing code base and just apply it without necessarily throwing up all of your triggers. So I think it has evolved very well. And it's also, when you talk about other libraries, credit to many of the other libraries out there that do Apex mocking as well.
Mm.
There's a number of those, much lighter than Apex, the fflib Apex mocks library, if that's what's needed. But yeah, that's the diversity of open source. I love it. I think it's great. There's even alternatives to DLRS out there now. So that's great.
Yeah, we should one day we'll have to do a full episode on mocking. Just it'd be like a 3-hour episode of you, a bunch of us sat discussing mocking, because again, it's one of those things that coming from so when I was doing .NET, I used a lot of mocking because I had 3 different databases I was using. So I wasn't running MS SQL Server full instance on my local development machine because I didn't have a death wish.
Right.
Whereas obviously, and so with the mocking on that front, I'm very much used to the kind of purist, like, well, we're mocking so that we can abstract away things on the ORM. Whereas now, obviously, it's like, well, with Salesforce, I know you have changed databases in the background, but I was never aware of it. No one else has ever seen it, and your ORM has kind of handled that. So there is always this. Again, I think there's an interesting. It's something Peter and I have discussed a number of times about the use of mocking and when it works and how far.
I love it, and I owe my love for that really to Paul Hardacre. He's now a CTO for another business, I forget the name of, but he was one of the founding members at FinancialForce when you were there as well, and I think he's running DevOps. And you have to get into the mind space, not just of mocking, but also just like test-driven development and thinking about what we're building. And it can be quite hard, but it does force you to think about the why before the what. And I think that muscle is still very valid, even though we have got AIs, Cursor AI, and other things that'll generate code from us straight away. I think what I'm learning from using those tools is it's important to have a plan, and because those tools will do literally what you say. And if what you say is, I want the world, they'll do a decent job at giving you that app, but you'll spend a lot of time iterating on it with it unless you think about the why. So I love the whole mindset mocking puts you into, actually, from an app design and requirements perspective.
Well, I think one of the biggest things that was very valuable to me when I first started at FF was you didn't let me do anything. You didn't let me work on any new stories for a while. All I was doing for a time period, this was just when we were going through updating all the testing to move from. So my first kind of 2 months were just sat next to Anish and Tony and opposite Stephen, and just being like, I've got to move it. And like, there was a bit of moving test.start test, test.stop test to kind of get within the parameters.
Right. Yeah.
Because that was when we were still doing a lot of manual testing. I remember spending one of the releases, spending about a week chasing down a rounding error that was different between Excel and how Salesforce.
Goodness, it's coming back to me now.
Yeah. All those things that you've repressed now through time. But one of the things that I always encourage people to do when they have new developers is to go away and get them doing tests.
Yeah.
And it was because doing that really helped me understand, okay, this is what's actually involved in creating an invoice and getting it posted and getting the journal records back out and all these things. Because you're truly trying to do this, work the system properly. And that's, and I think that's a very, very valuable thing. But especially to see how Salesforce's data structure works, if that makes sense. I think that there's so much in testing an application like that where you kind of understand how that works. And equally, I'm a big fan of the fact that thinking about the user is that if one of the things I always say is that if your tests take a long time to run, then your user's going to have it take a long time to run as well. And it's not always true. Not always true. Like I remember, like, if you've ever worked with like field service, for example, you have to set up about 75,000 objects and records before you can create a work item. But in general, it's one of those things. Like whenever I'm working with, I was helping another organization with their product a while ago, and they were saying about their test taking. So I was like, well, but and I was like, how do your users find it at the moment?
It is a good indicator, particularly if your triggers are running a long time as well. That's going to,
or recursively and all those things. It's again, because developers, we're very, very good at writing something giving it a quick test on the happy path in the UI and going, "Yep, that looks good," and
Mm-hmm.
forgetting that there's some poor person sat there every day going, "Oh my life, this takes 10 seconds every time." It's madness.
No, it's a really good point about learning a code base. I've been exploring having AIs describe a code base to me recently, and they're doing a pretty darn good job, actually. So, back in the day, I'd love to have had such a tool that would just go and explore that and explain it in English terms, what the process flows are and such like. Very, very handy, actually, for anybody listening. You going to a new code base, just asking it the question, parse this, and take a look at it. Good stuff.
Yeah, no, they're very, 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 very handy tools. So, one of the things that obviously, so after a lot of the stuff we talked about was when you were at FinancialForce, and then you migrated to Salesforce. So you moved from moved to the mothership, as I believe the term is. So just give us a description. So when you were at FinancialForce as the CTO, and then I think you changed. Did you change job titles at some point? I think it was or am I thinking of Stephen maybe, who changed, I think, from one or the other to head of platform or something. Anyway.
I didn't have that title at FinancialForce.
So when you moved to Salesforce, then what was one of the interesting drivers for that, and B, I don't think we want to go into sort of the full details. A, because you probably can't share too much from behind the scenes of the curtains, of course, and B, I think one of the things that just be interesting for people here is like what it's like managing something of that scale and size, the decisions that go in there, because if you have got anything you can share about what it's like managing such a big platform and things, when I jokingly said, "Oh my God," obviously you could just turn up and snap your fingers and say, "I want this," and we're going to do it. That's obviously not how the real world works. And as soon as when someone higher up says you're doing that, we want to do this. So what was that like, and what would you say were the biggest things you kind of learned through that?
I mean, the interesting reality is Salesforce is a huge company, which is obviously most people listening are very much aware of that. But what's also true is within the platform cloud, as we call it, within Salesforce, there's many leaders for different areas of the platform. And I was responsible for working on different aspects of that, largely around Salesforce DX and some of the scaling elements of it. Not the whole platform, unfortunately. But I was actually lucky enough to work on some skunk work improvements that allowed me to sort of peek into some aspects of the platform areas that I didn't own, obviously with partnership with the product managers that did. So, ultimately, it's a big surface area to cover, and there's lots of leaders covering it. But the big difference really joining that is that I had, and I mentioned this earlier, just more focus on the why. As a product manager, you really need to be accountable for that, even if you have a good sense of the customer need for it. And I did have a lot of sense of some of the things that were needed. And largely, I came into Salesforce to work on delivering elastic compute to Salesforce developers. And that's what Wade and I worked on in early days. And the why is really important to convince others internally, and obviously have ways to validate what it is you're delivering. So if you're responsible for a team, whether you're a team responsible for a team or yourself, in those situations you have to explain your logic, show your workings, and the why is super, super important. And I got the great privilege of working with some really, really intelligent folks in my first gig on what we call Salesforce Zero. At the time was the code name. It later came on to be a high-scale set of services for Commerce Cloud. It's still used today. But I learned a lot from that team about expressing the motivations and what the outcomes that we were looking for. So, this is ultimately product management, but I think it's easy coming from a technical role, as I was, even though I knew that was the case, to just subliminally just dismiss that at times. And I think I just had to hone that. And eventually I did. And it makes a big difference in terms of how you can get support internally for the things you need to do, because it's a very large platform and you need to change things in different spots. That means you have to go and talk to other people. And so networking is another key skill to learn. In some of the job is largely that, really. You just networking, making sure you're aligning roadmaps, making sure you're aligning motivations. Ultimately everybody wants to support your particular project, but they're going to have to derail or defocus something they want to do in their area of the platform. So you have to work together to align on what Salesforce calls V2 moms. And if you can do that, great things happen. If you can't, it's harder, but it's not often the end of the world. You can work around it. But I think the why and the networking are the things that make the big difference when I started that job. And the what part really came a little easier for me because, of course, I knew the Salesforce platform. But it also surprised that at times I realized that, and it's kind of obvious saying it, not everybody knows. Just because you're in Salesforce working on the Salesforce platform doesn't mean as an engineer or product manager you know everything else about the platform. To us, I think most people working on it and developing on it as customers, you do have a good idea of the spectrum of it. But if you're a product manager for feature X and a product manager for feature Y, and they're both at sort of opposing ends of the platform or in the middle somewhere, it's not a given they know the level. And so I had to make sure I was being an educator as well in my conversations. And I'm like, hey, how much do you know about this feature? And then give them the value prop of that. So I think my knowledge of the platform helped educate, especially on the developer experience. I spent some time with the Flow team early days on the format of the Flow structure, explaining how it just doesn't work very well in source control when you diff it, and show that and demo it. And then that made some eyebrows raised, and then we saw some changes. They were ultimately on the path to a better source format for it anyway, but it helped shine a bit more light on it. So a big part of my role was also just being an advocate for what I'd experienced in the community and what I personally had experienced, and educating there. Salesforce Zero was the first gig. I also got these skunk work improvements, like I introduced the test pane in Visual Studio Code. That was kind of with an intern that we worked on, designed that. Obviously, it's gone on to be further enhanced, so much more features added to it, log tailing, the callable interface in Apex was one Chris Peterson and I worked on, and it was probably the easiest enhancement he ever made because it was just adding an interface to Apex. But that one was the hardest one to. It was easier to get done because it was cheaper. Largely, when I talk about convincing people of the value and having the why, you still have to do that. But if it's a cheap thing to do, it's considered less of the why. But still. The callable thing's gone on to being used as we expected it to be used in sort of decoupling scenarios and whatnot. And then the call outs to SF APIs without remote sites was something I was passionate about from the metadata Apex things. So lots of small things in the early days, but ultimately and this kind of segues, I think, into your next sort of questions about Heroku. It was really the calling to bring elastic compute to devs when needed. And not only that, not just elastic compute, but other programming languages, opening them up to Salesforce developers, and in turn bringing industry or Java node developers into a Salesforce ecosystem was really still the beating heart of what I wanted to achieve. And we've had a crack at that with functions, and we're now starting that over again with AppLink, and I'm super proud to be involved in that and driving some of that forward. And I think you're keen to make sure we show some of that in our live coding sessions coming up. But that's probably a segue into your next question, I think.
Well, before we jump across, I have two other quick questions around your time at Salesforce. So one of them is something that I discussed with Kieran on our last episode, which is about being a technical person moving into a product management or a requirements giving role. And just really interesting your off the cuff view, but I think that I am, whenever I move into being a requirements giver. So sometimes I in my last organization, for example, I had a team where we were implementing a new internal tool on Salesforce, and I was the one writing the requirements and giving the spec and doing that.
Mm-hmm.
It genuinely took me a while to get my head around doing that because I was too good at doing the what and not good enough
Yep.
at giving the why and the or the what I want rather than giving the how I want it done. Um, did you have any kind of time like that where you thought, okay, I need to go away and rework the
Yeah, I mean,
skill? What did you find it?
I think that's what I was alluding to earlier. That when my first kind of gig, the Salesforce Zero team, um, that they were all deep technologists. It was an engineering team, but they were all a bunch of architects, and they were very. I didn't need to tell them. In fact, they were exception to the rule to some degree in terms of what I was mentioning earlier. They knew a lot about the breadth of the platform anyway, and they didn't
Yeah.
need me to tell them that. But they really needed the why. And I think, yeah, you're right. You have to hone that skill and really switch off the what thing, the engineering bit. Just completely switch that off. Like, what's fundamentally going to change that user's life? What is it going to make
Mm.
improve for them? I mean, you can state that in terms of what the business is going to do and improve, but it all starts with making sure that the people in the business are benefiting from it in some way. What is that? And in some respects, it's simpler than you might think. And I think engineering folks sometimes overlook the simpler whys and don't articulate them, because afterwards I'd explain my whys and somebody would come to me, but isn't it just as simple as this, Andy? And I'm like, yeah, it is. Did that not come across? Because
Yeah.
it never occurred to me to say the simpler whys, because my engineering brain had just skipped over those bits.
Yeah.
So I think, make sure you backtrack all the way up the ladder as to what it is you're affecting. What are the goals and what you're trying to achieve? And I would also lean on others that have been in the product management roles much longer and maybe even less technical than you, because they'll be good litmus tests. So I learned to do that as well. I had some good mentors along the way and still have access to many of those folks to just bounce things off. Say, does this make sense? Because that's, even for something like platform features, this should be a moment where at least anybody can get a basic understanding of what you're trying to do. And I think the platform and generally platforms or technological features are extra hard than just, say, working on a sales cloud or service cloud value prop or requirement, because they're more relatable as humans. Like we do those things. But with platforms, they're abstract already.
Yeah.
So you have to state a type of business case that's going to be benefited from it. That isn't like, oh, I can run Apex quicker, or Apex can now process binary files. Like, why? Why is that useful?
Yeah.
Oh, now my business can generate more clear documentation in PDF format and share it on, so you have to think about the whys much more carefully. But it's not hard. It's just, what's hard is giving yourself space to do it and time to do it properly, because it can make or break whether or not your idea really resonates. And it can be quite dispiriting, when it doesn't, for the sake of just not spending that time really hardening the why.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a really, really helpful answer. Thank you. So the second question was a slightly lighter one, which is obviously you were in San Francisco, so you moved. And for those who don't know Andy as well as I do, Andy is very much a Yorkshireman through and through, having lived in this area, lived in the area that we both live in for almost all of your life, except for that period, pretty much of in San Francisco. So what was the thing you missed most in San Francisco from, and obviously aside from the rain, what was the thing you missed most in San Francisco from the UK, and what was the thing you missed
Right.
most now in the UK from San Francisco?
Yeah, I mean, it seems quite stereotypical to say, but being back in the UK, we've been back about 8-9 months now. The weather, it's very where we were on the coast. It was kind of a warmish summer like in the UK, but all the time, more or less. And it was that was something that we miss, but not enough for the converse of your question, which was friends and family.
Yeah.
I think ultimately in your career you do prioritize things differently depending on where you are in your career, and I think we did make the decision that it was time to come home. We were never going to stay in the States indefinitely.
No.
I've never put a date or time on it. It wasn't 20 years. It wasn't maybe 15. It was somewhere around that, maybe
Yeah.
max. But we just knew, and it felt right to make the move back. And coming back has validated that time and time again with the last few months being around friends and family for lots of reasons. So we feel great about the decision, but ultimately it was an awesome experience being in the United States and being in San Francisco. We did a lot of traveling, looking around, and just working there was an amazing thing, part of my life that I wouldn't regret ever. But it's, Yorkshire has a certain draw to it, and
Was it just coming back for a proper cup of tea? That was the main
yeah,
thing.
it was. Yeah, the food particularly for us was one that we yearned as well. For one reason or another, we just didn't always find that one place or that one type of food that we really loved. And I know that might be a shock to some people because it's culinary place that it's renowned for, but that was just us. But that was kind of that's hopefully answered your questions. The weather is a typical one, but it is beautiful. It is amazing. You can go to the beach, and it's just all year round. Unfortunately, like most of the planet, it's suffering its own level of variations of the weather, which can be scary as well. But other than that, we love the weather, but more so the people and the family back here has been the big draw.
No, and that's a wonderful reason to come back. And so when you came back, obviously you switched into your new role at Heroku. So yeah, give us a bit of an overview of what your new role at Heroku is, and kind of the switch, and yeah, so sort of, obviously I know you and I have chatted, and you said that you felt it was the right time to come and do that. So just give people a little bit of a flavor of that decision and when that happened.
Yeah. So I mean, ultimately, it happened at the same time I moved back to the UK. The product role I had there was running a product team that's 100% in the USA. So I've kind of done a few time zone things over the years in the past, and shifting, and it wasn't going to be personally amenable for me, and from a business point of view, wasn't viable either. So I was lucky enough to work with Salesforce. Bob Wise was the CEO for Heroku at the time, and just figured out he knew very well. We got to know each other pretty well. He knew what my skills and aptitude was, and we also needed more coverage for Heroku in EMEA from a sort of sales and just general brand awareness perspective. So we continued to build out Heroku. So I'm currently VP Developer Operations working in the EMEA region. I have the awesome privilege of working with two other developer relations folks over in the US. One of them being the infamous Julian Duque. I learned so much from him and continue to do. I'm very privileged to work with him. I'm currently focusing on Agentforce, which might surprise some people that I say that, but maybe not, because we're part of Salesforce. Agentforce is a huge and a significant focus for Salesforce, and is making a big splash, not just within the Salesforce industry, but also just the agentic movement in general. And Heroku's launch of its new AppLink add-on, which serves in some respects as a successor to Functions, but goes much more into where we wanted to go ultimately with Functions. But it's a good time, because now you can take your Node, Java, Python, Ruby code and write actions for Agentforce. And if you think that's kind of marketing kind of brush over, it's not actually. Hopefully your listeners will see in our live videos how you can literally now go to the setup menu and see Heroku and add those actions and use them. It's not to say Flow and Apex actions are not recommended. It's because, like we've talked about a few times on this call, it's good to have options and have the spectrum of capabilities. So what I'm focusing on right now, mostly amongst other Salesforce Heroku releases, like we just added .NET to Heroku. We've launched our new Kubernetes-based platform called Fur. But I'm really heavily focused in using Heroku with Agentforce right now. So, and it's a good combo, as you mentioned, of kind of bringing back my skills of understanding what the sweet spots are within the platform, because AppLink works with Flow and Apex, whether you use Agentforce or not. So you can expand those tools and automations that you're building using AppLink. So of course, I'm kind of back using those, and you don't forget it easily, and I'm loving it. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now, and just touring a few European events. This month I'm going to be in Barcelona and Prague, doing some stuff talking about that, and yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah, it sounds good. So yeah, we've mentioned AppLink a couple of times. So and you mentioned it's kind of a spiritual successor to Functions, really. So so, yeah, so first of all, for those listening, if you might be listening to this way in the future, and I need to plan the release schedule for this. So Andy will be joining myself and Peter on the Sandbox Sessions live streams for a couple of episodes where we're going to be doing some Heroku stuff. So because I'm a huge fan of Heroku and have so I have a product coming out soon that uses Heroku in the back end. I have written a number of things on Heroku over the years, and always found it easy to work with and a great tool. So we got one episode where you're going to join us, and we're going to build just a brand new Heroku app, aren't we? Because it's one of those things, I think, for Salesforce developers that sometimes, Heroku doesn't have a high barrier to entry, but it's also still knowing, okay, actually, from ground zero, how do I get started? How do I get something built? So we're going to build an app out. And then what we're going to do is take that app or API we've built and then use AppLink to allow us to utilize it from Salesforce. So if you're interested in seeing AppLink run, I'm going to say under duress and with, at least Andy will know what he's doing programming away, because if anyone's ever watched it, they'll know that I can at least talk for myself and Peter in that often it's disorganized chaos. So, between the three of us, we'll get an API built out and get it connected to AppLink. But I'm really looking forward to seeing it, because I think it's such one of the things that I've seen, particularly in the consulting world, if I'm honest, more than in the ISV world, is over the years, more and more people integrating with AWS, particularly for Lambda functions, because they are they're again a nice abstraction that means you don't have to do a bunch of server management and setup like that. But I think what a lot of people forget is it's the security around it again. It's the AWS is a secure platform if you've configured it correctly to be secure, number one. But it's AWS is a true box of Lego pieces. You can build. I mean, I was talking to someone the other week about it, who was a company that were looking at whether to go with Heroku or AWS. And part of the conversation, they're one of my app customers, and they just said, "Would you mind us picking your brains on it?" And I said to them, "Go with Heroku," and they were like, "Well, why? But isn't Heroku just AWS up? We're just paying for a layer on top." I was like, "Yes, you are." I was like, but the layer you're paying for on top is the layer of, I don't have to sit there and choose from the 9,000 options. I've got the security set up. I've got it integrated well. It will run seamless. Like all of these things out there that you don't want to think about. That, again, if you want to go and build it, good luck to you and have fun doing so. But to me, that's just like, why would I spend time building out an API gateway, a Lambda function that connects to the gateway, and all, when something like AppLink can just do that and is also embedded into the UI, which I think is another really key thing out there.
Yeah, no, I couldn't have said it better myself, Paul. I mean, it just comes back to the theme of this conversation, is choosing the right tools that keep you focused on business logic that differentiates your business. If you're doing things everyone else is doing, then you're defocused from being competitive or getting whatever it is you're building out sooner rather than later. And I think that's when you look at Heroku and the general Salesforce platform, they both have a very strong part of their DNA that focuses on that story. And I love to refer to as one of the Heroku architects has once said this: customers love Heroku for all the hard things they don't have to think about. And it's so true. And it's not so much have to think about, it's like whether I could even do that right now. It's like being a security expert and get all the compliance, the SOC and HIPAA compliances and things like that. I remember early days with FinancialForce, one of the most exciting things was becoming SOX compliance. And that was, I think, in year 1 or 2. And that compliance was pages and pages, maybe even hundreds of rules. And what we did is cut that down by around, I don't know, roughly 2/3 because we were using Salesforce. And those sort of moments really show you that, yes, there is a price for these sort of PaaS abstraction platforms, but when you look at the total cost of ownership, then that's what you really need to have your eye on.
Yeah, and it's also, I think the other like really interesting little key thing to build on that though is that so I have an app on the App Exchange. My company are not listed as being SOX compliant or ISO compliant or any of these things because we don't, I send messages I don't need to be, and my message sender's ISO compliant, but my message sender's ISO compliant and Salesforce are ISO compliant.
Yeah,
but
there you
go. All of the certifications Salesforce get, you kind of, as long as you follow the rules properly, it's pretty much enforced anyway. It's not like, it's not like I'm going to break the security. I mean, I can break things if I really want to, as we both well know, and as you have seen, I can break
great
things.
Power, great responsibility.
Yeah, you've been there enough times when I've made things collapse, but yeah, it is that thing of just having, as you say, that the stuff that's pre-built for you that you don't have to think about. And so obviously AppLink's one of the big things you're working on at the moment. There's also Heroku events, isn't there?
There is,
Has that changed
that'll
name
come,
now? Have I made that
that'll
up?
come a bit later in the year, but it's in pilot as well. In fact, you can sign up for both of them right now on our blog. But that brings, essentially creates Heroku as an eventing hub. So you can pub sub configure multiple orgs together and exchange events between them. You can link your code to those events, obviously, a bit like you can with Apex, so you can subscribe to them. But yeah, the neat thing is that it's one interface for listening to multiple events across multiple orgs from a Salesforce perspective. But those events ultimately will become from other data sources as well, including Data Cloud as well. So it's a great way of connecting, building event-driven architectures in a way where you've centralized all of the authentication and the configuration. And it's one API as well that you have to pub sub to. So, these days, when you think about that, there are some standards, but largely if you've got a large organization with lots of event buses, you're using different APIs and different authentications in your app. Whereas what Heroku Eventing is doing is managing that for you in one central place, the authentication and the developer experience and the API that your app uses. So yes, you have to configure that, but ultimately the benefit is your app code is much more streamlined and dependent solely on a single set of APIs and developer experience. So, and yeah, I think this is the first time we've been able to, from a Salesforce perspective, build an event bus experience over multiple orgs.
So that sounds, I mean, that's cool because, having worked with, there's one organization I worked with that had 2 orgs and we connected them via platform events, which worked well. But it was always a case of there was still a lot of plumbing that needed doing.
Yeah, one-to-one works quite well, but when it gets to many-to-one,
or
you want
that was.
It was one of the things it'll allow you to do. And I'll be working on a sample for this a bit nearer the time we get a bit further down the road with the GA for it. But you'll be able to subscribe to multiple events and then transform those and send those events off to like a hub org. And some of that might even be declarative itself. We're using a technology called Bloblang. It's an industry standard. And that's like a transformation language which you'd run as part of the stream. So, again, similarities with the broader ethos of Salesforce make the hard things simple. And if you want to do event streaming between multiple orgs and do some transformation using Bloblang, then you don't necessarily need to write code for that. It's a configuration thing. So Bloblang is like an expression service.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that I'm particularly interested in seeing with AppLink in particular is I think it opens up a new opportunity for both open source but also paid kind of plugin options. And what I mean by that is that if you imagine that you've got a solution that's out there that that has either has an API or has something going on or whatever it might be, and you can connect that into Salesforce, and you can package that and connect that into Salesforce, and it goes through every time. But you've still got a lot of connectivity there that you have to build out, and a lot of things you have to do. What I think is going to be interesting is there'll be this opportunity to build a suite of things that are on Heroku that you can then have a way of saying, great, you can authenticate with this through your Salesforce org. You can utilize this in your Salesforce org and go out there. So whether it's just people providing simple connectors to things like, hey, do you want to get, do you want to do some like image manipulation? Do you want to PDF generation? Do you want to do, whatever it might
A
be?
library of actions, basically.
Yeah, exactly. That you can then package up there. And I think that for those of us involved in product development, it's interesting to think about what we could be selling for those products to do that. And for those who aren't in product development but are just looking at like what libraries and utilities can they use, it's a great way of saying like, actually, I can build one little app that you can allow people to deploy and redeploy as many times as you want out there, or host your own little LLM on there and have it generate documentation, generate answers, generate whatever it needs to be.
Yeah, no, it's super enabling, and builds on the actions concept within Salesforce, which teaches you to think about libraries. Just as we have like flow templates for equivalent of building flows, actions let you expand not just on agent builder actions, but also inside Flow and Apex and other builders within Salesforce that use that concept. So the same muscle that draws you or should be drawing you to think about creating flows or Apex invocable things that form a utility, a library of useful things, that library can now be supercharged with, hey, I can do some heavy lifting in Java or Node or Python with AI or PDF generation or image manipulation, and yet I still get the same experience in Salesforce. In a way, these actions appear literally like regular actions, so there's no telling really, other than there's some semantics with them being a call out. Largely that's somewhat abstracted these days as well. There's no telling what implementation those actions are as an admin. You're just seeing the actions and using them. And I'm looking forward to showing that, Paul, because I think that's one of the big differences we've brought in compared to functions in its initial release is now the bona fide actions. And if you look closely behind the scenes, you'll see that external services has evolved a lot over the last two or 3 years, and now MuleSoft as well as Heroku are leveraging that innovation because they're exposing their APIs, MuleSoft APIs, as actions. So they, big credit to the external services team within Salesforce who are not only enabling customers but enable internal product teams to bring their products and services in such a natural way into the core platform. So I think that's huge.
I'm really looking forward to doing the live streams together, because it's been it's going to be good to kind of I think show how that all comes together over a couple of episodes as well. And and it's been quite a few years since you and I have sat down next to each other, even virtually, and done any programming together. So
well, we are in the same town, so maybe we could do it physically.
We could do. I mean, we've got it's Peter's remote, so we'll have to figure out what we do with Peter on there. But yeah, we could definitely figure out something and find a space maybe and do that. But so looking forward to that, and that is so I think we've scheduled them for the 22nd of May and the 5th of June. Is my recollection at the moment. So they'll be confirmed and put public. I think weirdly this podcast episode will come out in between the two. So if you are listening to this, make sure you go back and watch one and then get ready for the other one. But I might shuffle the schedule around so that this comes out first, and all those references we made to Kieran's episode a minute ago, we'll just have to listen to next time. It's the joys of scheduling. Very excited about that. So we've kind of covered a lot today in terms of the different things you're working on now, and kind of that motivation. And one of the things that you and I went out for lunch a few weeks back and caught up, and one of the things that really struck me about it is how happy you seem to kind of be doing this sort of work, which is going back to kind of that community stuff, that engagement with the community and sharing your knowledge and building cool things, and scratching your itches to show things that can be done, as it were.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I think is really nice is that full circle of how you've come through it, how how much you've given along the way to the community, and given back. And I know so many of us are very, very thankful and grateful for all those things you've released, all the knowledge you've shared, and things like that. Do you personally feel that it's been very much that full circle? Is there and kind of what excites you most about where you are now with what you're doing, I suppose?
Well, I think ultimately it is coming back to it, but it's all really circled always around the joy of creation, and I think all of us thrive to create something others will seek value in. And when it comes down to software, where specifically you have to remind yourself that somebody has to enjoy using it, really. If
Mhm.
they don't, then it's, they might be forced to use it, or, it just might be other motivations, but it has to enjoy using it. And I think whether you're an engineer building a product, thinking about how responsive and performant it is, that's part of the joy. Whether you're in product designing that feature and really nailing the top 3 things they're doing in their inner loop or outer loop or whatever, that's part of it. And then when you're promoting a product, you're really still tapping into that desire that human beings want to seek joy in what they're doing. And I have always wanted to do that. And as a developer, I saw code and still do as an art form. And I
Mm.
like to get joy out of that. And when I'm creating code now for content for the role I'm in, I still enjoy doing that. I'm enjoying experimenting with using AI to help assist in that process, but I'm still very much training that AI to generate the code and lay it out the way I feel good about that.
Mm.
So I think it is sort of full circle to what my engineering self felt when it comes down to literally creating code. That circle hasn't closed. I think there's more to come. But right now, I absolutely love continuing to use my passion for developing and creating things in the easiest way but delightful way possible. And being part of Salesforce and Heroku and doing that is still a big buzz for me. So yeah, I think it's good. I think it's hard sometimes to navigate a career and not maintain some of what you've always loved in each part of that, but I somehow managed to hold on to that. And there's a lot of people that have enabled that, which I'm very grateful to. So yeah, looking forward to the next part of the circle.
That's fantastic. Well, and thank you so much for coming on the episode and sharing all your experience, all your thoughts, and and from myself personally, thank you so much for hiring me about 15 years ago, and
It's a
after the
pleasure,
first
Paul.
few weeks, just not immediately going, "Oh my life, what have I done here?" And because it's from someone who knows you as a friend, it has been great over these 15 years as well to see the stuff you've done, because I know it's inspired myself and a lot of other people that there are all these opportunities, are all those things, and you can put yourself out there. So it's been wonderful. So the final question is, obviously we've covered today, community engagement. We've covered scratching your own itches. We've covered, some of the new exciting Heroku stuff. We've covered being quite true to yourself and being introvert and extrovert, and lots and lots of things covered.
Wow, it's been a
Yeah,
long
I mean,
hour
yeah,
and 18 minutes.
we're an hour and 18 minutes in. We've done a lot. So the last question I have is, I always ask everyone if they've got sort of like a tip or a trick or a piece of advice they would share with the listeners today, and that can be about anything, whether it's something career focused, whether it's something particularly, it might be a technical hack you've got, it might be something around engagement. But is there something that you think's been key to your success that you would give to people as a bit of advice, or something particularly at the moment that's top of mind that you think, actually, yeah, this would be my piece of advice to people listening to this to take away an action today? And as I say, we have covered a lot of stuff today, so I'm pretty sure that anyone could listen to this episode and probably get about 20 tips out of it. But is there one that pops into your head?
I think mostly what I, I've learned over the years is try to maintain a level of vulnerability in everything that you do. Nobody's perfect, and nobody expects you to be perfect. But if you try to give the impression that you are, and you're closed off, and you don't ask for advice or help, you're not really serving yourself or perception of others. So I think be vulnerable. Obviously, depending on where you are and the context, that's difficult. But allow people to know that you don't need to know, you don't know everything, and they're there to help fill those gaps, especially if you're in leadership. And ask for advice when needed. Check, validate how you're coming across to people, both as a person but also in your content, and really listen to that. And I think it's super important. And a lot of people are really good at giving that in a very constructive way. And when you find those people, latch on to them and make sure you use them as mentors. So I think find strong people that you can trust and that will mentor you and give you the honest opinion is really, really important. And then, be vulnerable. I think it helps a lot of people, especially if you're in leader positions, to know that, you're not perfect, and it has to be a team effort to pull things together. I always remember a Salesforce event where there was one of our key leaders. We're all at a kind of leadership convention that the Salesforce do, and stood up, and it was one of our high leaders, and said, look, I was a time where I just didn't know what I was doing, and it went on for months until eventually I said to my boss, I don't know what I need to do. And it turns out they didn't know either, but they went and asked somebody else, and they told them, and that put them back on the same path. So if you're feeling lost, don't just sit on it. So I think, listen to those thoughts. If you're feeling anxious about what you need to do or how you're going about doing it, don't sit on those. And it's hard to do sometimes, I think, as engineers, which I consider myself as. That's in my DNA. It always will be. But because you like to think everything is just black and white. It's the code that does what the code does, and that's it. But it's more than that. To get on in life and in business, you've got to be a genuine kind of person. And I think coming with that is just accepting that there's always opportunity to learn.
That is a fantastic piece of advice. So thank you very much, Andy, once again for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure having you on here and catching up again.
Likewise.
Thank you to everyone for listening. If you make sure you subscribe so you can keep up to date with all the latest episodes and any new episodes that drop. Remember to visit YouTube, to go to the YouTube channel to sign up to watch the live streams where Andy will be joining us in a few weeks' time to build out some Heroku apps. Again, remember to leave a like and subscribe. And thank you very much once again, Andy, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
Everyone.